The silent observer. Willow Ridge Academy stood as a beacon of privilege and exclusivity, its grand facade an imposing symbol of wealth and status. The sprawling campus, surrounded by lush, manicured lawns, was a haven for the elite, where every stone, every corner, gleamed with affluence. Each morning, as the first rays of sunlight bathed the towering columns of the main building, the ritzy procession of high-end vehicles began. Luxury cars, gleaming under the early light, rolled through the ornate iron gates, their polished exteriors glinting like a new diamond. Rolls-Royces, Teslas, and Bentleys, some with tinted windows, others with custom paint jobs, lined up, waiting for their precious cargo to emerge. From these vehicles emerged the students, the sons and daughters of the city's wealthiest families, dressed in designer clothes, their accessories as fine as their haircuts. Their steps were graceful, like they had been born with an innate understanding of confidence. Each one seemed a picture of perfection, their lives designed to fit a mold of success, wealth, and poise. They wore their privilege like a badge, never questioning the lives they led, nor the world they inhabited. They walked past the enormous gates without a second thought, their heads held high, their voices laughing carelessly, as if they belonged to a world far removed from the struggles of others. Yet, amidst this shining world, there was a figure who seemed out of place, a solitary shadow that moved through the halls with quiet dignity, unnoticed by most, forgotten by all. Her name was Martha, and she had worked at Willow Ridge Academy for nearly 3 decades. Her job, that of a janitor, was not glamorous, nor was it one that ever commanded attention. But it was a job she had accepted long ago, one she did with a quiet and unfaltering sense of duty. Martha was an elderly woman, her skin dark and weathered by the years, her hair turned silver by the weight of time. There was a quiet elegance to her, a grace that had not been lost with age, though it was rarely seen by anyone who passed her by. Her back was hunched, not just by the physical demands of cleaning the vast school but by the weight of years spent laboring in the shadows. Her hands, though rough and calloused, were steady and practiced. They had scrubbed floors, wiped down desks, polished brass, and emptied trash bins for countless hours, days, and years. Her worn blue janitor's uniform hung loosely on her slight frame, the fabric faded and frayed at the edges. Each day, as the students bustled about, coming and going, Martha moved silently through the hallways. She would often pause for a brief moment, looking around the school that had become her world. The building was beautiful, its walls adorned with fine art and its floors polished to perfection. The sounds of laughter and the hum of conversation filled the air, but they were not directed at her. Instead, she was little more than a fixture in the background, a part of the scenery that everyone had grown used to ignoring. There were no greetings exchanged with the students. No friendly waves or smiles. They passed her by as if she were a ghost, existing in the periphery of their lives, unnoticed and unimportant. Martha had long accepted her place in the grand scheme of things. She knew that her role was one of servitude, of quiet labor, and that her presence would never make a ripple in the lavish world the students inhabited. She was, in a sense, invisible. And that suited her just fine. There were days when Martha would catch a glimpse of the students as they walked past her. She would look up briefly from her work, her deep brown eyes scanning the faces of the young people who seemed to float through the halls, their lives filled with promise and possibility. Some of them were familiar, having attended the school for years. Others were new faces, their postures stiff with the weight of expectations. Yet, no one ever looked at her. No one ever stopped to ask how she was or acknowledge her presence. It wasn't that the students were cruel, it was simply that they had never been taught to notice her, to see her as anything more than an invisible part of the landscape. Martha never expected anything else. She had long stopped hoping for acknowledgement. Her work was simply what it was, a task that needed to be done. And she would do it, as quietly and unobtrusively as she could. She took pride in her work, though no one ever saw it. Every inch of the school was spotless, every floor gleaming. She did it for herself, not for the recognition of others, though there were times when she would allow herself to dream of being seen, of being known for more than the mop she carried and the dust she cleaned away. The students, in their luxurious lives, lived in a world where their worth was measured by wealth, appearance, and status. Martha's worth, on the other hand, was determined by the invisible labor she provided. There was no grand recognition, no applause, just the endless cycle of cleaning, polishing, and maintaining the pristine environment of Willow Ridge Academy. She had no illusions about her place. She was a cog in the machine, an unnoticed part of the system, and that was how it had always been. But Martha, despite the years of quiet acceptance, still held a small flicker of something deep within her, a strength, a depth, and a richness of experience that no one knew about. She had lived a life far different from the one the students at Willow Ridge knew. She had grown up in hardship, in a world where survival had been the only goal. But she had also experienced beauty, through music, through the love of her family, and through moments of joy that had somehow withstood the harshest of circumstances. In her younger days, Martha had been a gifted musician. She had played the piano with a passion that few had ever understood, pouring her soul into the keys. But those days had long since passed, overshadowed by the demands of survival and the burdens of time. Every now and then, Martha would walk past the music room, her eyes glancing toward the dusty piano that sat forgotten in the corner. It was an old instrument, its keys yellowed with age, its wood scratched and worn. It hadn't been touched in years. But the sight of it always stirred something deep inside Martha, a memory of a time when she had been more than just the janitor, a time when her hands had created something beautiful. She had always dreamed of playing again, but those dreams seemed so distant now. The piano was a relic of another life, a life she could never return to. So, she passed it by without a second thought, always pushing forward, always cleaning, always serving. But little did Martha know, the dust that settled on that piano was about to be disturbed in the most unexpected way. And in a few days' time, it would be her hands, not her mop, that would leave the world at Willow Ridge stunned and speechless. Martha's daily routine continued uninterrupted for the most part. She cleaned the classrooms, the hallways, and the offices, working quietly in the background as the students carried on with their lives. The school's daily rhythm seemed set in stone, its gears turning without anyone giving much thought to the woman who made it all possible. But things were changing, subtly at first, like a storm gathering on the horizon. And when the winds of change finally blew, it would be Martha who would turn the tide, not with her anger or her protests, but with the gift of music she had long hidden from the world. In the weeks to come, the students would no longer see her as the invisible janitor. Instead, they would learn that beneath her humble appearance lay a power they could not ignore. And in the process, they would come to understand that even in the most forgotten corners of their world, greatness could be found, if only they had the courage to look. The mocking challenge. It was a day like any other at Willow Ridge Academy, yet for Martha, it felt as if the still waters of her life were beginning to stir. The clock on the wall of the main hallway ticked away the seconds, marking another hour in the long, quiet span of her workday. She shuffled through the school's corridors, her mop cart clinking softly with the tools she needed to get the job done. The students filed past her without a second glance, their voices filled with animated chatter and light-hearted laughter. The pristine marble floors beneath her shoes gleamed brightly, reflecting the polished world around her, a world to which she had long been relegated to the edges. But Martha wasn't focused on the students. No, her thoughts were elsewhere, drifting in the quiet comfort of routine. Yet, her peace was about to be shattered in the most unexpected of ways. It began with a burst of laughter, loud, mocking, and unmistakable. Martha paused for a moment, lifting her head to look down the hall where the sound had come from. A group of students, standing near the open doors of one of the classrooms, were gathered in a circle, chatting animatedly. In the middle of them stood a man who had long earned his reputation among the students for his arrogance and pretentiousness, Mr. Landon. A teacher of history, his sharp jawline and immaculate attire made him the embodiment of authority in the students' eyes. He was known for his superiority complex and tendency to mock those he deemed beneath him. He was laughing at something, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that signaled joy. It was a sneer, a laugh that was meant to belittle, to make someone feel small. Martha, sensing the shift in the air, quietly moved her cart closer, trying to remain out of sight. "Watch this," Mr. Landon said with a smug grin, turning to the students. "I bet you've never seen a janitor who can play the piano, have you?" His words were directed toward the group of wealthy students standing around him. His tone was condescending, as if he had just stumbled upon the perfect joke, one that would make the students laugh at the expense of the old, invisible woman who swept the floors of their precious school. One of the students, a girl with perfectly styled hair and a designer bag slung over her shoulder, giggled. "A janitor playing the piano? That's rich. Does she even know what a piano is?" Her laughter echoed through the hall, and the others joined in, their voices growing louder, more mocking. Martha stood frozen, her heart sinking as she realized what was happening. She had long been aware of the students' attitude toward her, but this felt different. The laughter wasn't just the usual indifference. It was deliberate cruelty, designed to mock her dignity, to remind her of her place. She wanted to turn away, to ignore them, to keep pushing her cart down the hallway and retreat into the silence she knew so well. But something inside her stirred, a flicker of defiance, of indignation. She wasn't sure where it came from, but she knew that she couldn't let them have this victory. Mr. Landon, seeing the response he had ignited, stepped forward with an exaggerated flourish. "All right, folks, let's see if the old woman can prove us wrong." "Martha," he called, his voice ringing through the hall. "You're the janitor, right? I hear there's a piano in the music room. Why don't you show us your talent? Let's see if you've got what it takes to play a real instrument, or if you're just here to clean up after us." The students erupted in laughter once again, some of them rolling their eyes, others snickering behind their hands. The moment felt like a stage performance, with Mr. Landon playing the role of the charming villain, and the students as the raucous, enthusiastic audience. The whole school had become a theater for their amusement. The cruel irony was that they believed they had all the power in this moment, that their privilege and status gave them the right to mock someone they considered less than. Martha stood there, a quiet figure, her hands clutching the handle of her mop cart, the harsh laughter still ringing in her ears. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her, the judgment, the ridicule. It was as though they were waiting for her to crumble, to apologize for her existence. They wanted to see her humiliated, to prove that she was no more than the invisible figure they had always believed her to be. But instead of cowering, Martha did something that no one expected. She said nothing. There were no words, no protests, no cries for mercy. She didn't need to defend herself or explain her worth. Instead, with quiet dignity, she walked past them, her feet moving with purpose, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. She moved as though the cruel words hadn't pierced her heart, as though the laughter hadn't stung her soul. She was determined not to give them the satisfaction of seeing her falter. She walked straight to the music room. The door to the music room creaked as she opened it, the sound echoing in the still air. It was a forgotten room, the piano inside gathering dust, the keys yellowed with age. The instrument had once been the pride of the Academy's music program, but over the years, it had been left to rot in the corner. No one had played it for years, not since the music program had been cut, replaced by more important activities. But the piano still stood, its frame sturdy, its silent strings waiting for a touch. Martha stood for a moment, looking at the piano. Her heart raced in her chest, and for a moment, she wondered if this was a mistake. Was she too old? Was her talent gone, forgotten like the piano itself? But something within her told her to take that step. She could no longer stand by and let the mockery continue. Not like this. She slowly approached the piano, her hands trembling slightly as she touched the ivory keys. The dust swirled around her fingers as she brushed them across the surface. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, everything seemed to still. The laughter, the sneering students, the cruel words, all faded away. There was only the piano, and her. Her fingers pressed lightly on the keys, and for the first time in years, a melody filled the room. It was soft at first, hesitant, as though the piano itself had forgotten how to sing. But then, as the music began to flow, Martha's body relaxed. Her heart, too, began to open up. The notes, the chords, they were like old friends returning to her, each one familiar and comforting. Her hands moved with practiced grace, the years of neglect falling away as her talent poured out, filling the room with a beauty that no one had expected. Outside, the students fell silent as the sound of the piano reached them. The laughter died down. No one spoke. It was as though the world had shifted in an instant, and no one knew how to react. Mr. Landon stood frozen in the hallway, his smug expression fading into one of disbelief. The students, once so eager to mock, were now caught in a moment of unexpected awe. They had underestimated her, they had underestimated Martha. Her fingers danced across the keys, the music rising, filling the empty halls. It was not just a song, it was a story of years of silent suffering, of the dignity she had maintained in the face of cruelty, of a life lived in the shadows, unnoticed and unappreciated. The melody was her voice, her truth, her defiance. It was a reminder that even in the most overlooked corners of the world, there was power that couldn't be seen, but could always be felt. The music continued, sweeping through the halls of Willow Ridge Academy, transforming the space. And in that moment, no one dared to laugh, to mock, or to dismiss her. For in her silence, in the depths of her music, Martha had revealed something far more powerful than they could ever have imagined. The silent revolution. The music lingered in the air like a faint whisper, swirling around the hallways of Willow Ridge Academy, slowly dismantling the thick walls of arrogance and pride that had been built over the years. Martha's hands continued to glide across the keys, each note infused with memories of days long gone. She was no longer just the elderly janitor pushing her mop cart through the grand halls of the school. In that moment, she was a storyteller, a vessel for a melody that spoke louder than words ever could. Outside the music room, the students stood frozen, their laughter now a distant echo that no longer seemed to hold the same power it once did. No one moved. No one even breathed. The grand piano, neglected and covered in dust, was no longer just an instrument. It had become a bridge between two worlds, the world of privilege, glittering with wealth and entitlement, and the quiet, forgotten world of those like Martha, who had lived in its shadow for so long. And in that space between these two realms, the music took on an almost sacred quality. It was as though the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. Martha, her face soft but determined, played on. Her fingers moved with the grace of someone who had spent countless hours immersed in music, someone who had known the highs and lows of life, and yet had never allowed herself to be broken by them. She was the quiet witness to a world that rarely saw her, but now, as her hands brought the keys to life, she was more present than ever before. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Martha felt seen. And she wasn't the only one who felt the change. Mr. Landon stood in the hallway, the confidence he had once worn so easily slipping away like sand through his fingers. His arms, which had once been folded in a self-assured manner, now hung loosely at his sides. He blinked rapidly, as if trying to process the situation unfolding before him. The mocking tone he had used moments earlier was nowhere to be found. The sneer that had curled on his lips had disappeared, replaced by a look of genuine disbelief. He had never once considered that the old janitor might be anything more than an invisible fixture in the grand scheme of the academy. He had never thought twice about the woman who had cleaned the classrooms, mopped the floors, and swept the halls, day in and day out. Now, he stood in stunned silence, staring at the music room door as if waiting for the very walls to give him an explanation for what was happening. The students, too, were in shock. For the wealthy teenagers who had grown up with every advantage, designer clothes, private tutors, and expensive cars, this moment was nothing short of a revelation. They had never imagined that someone like Martha, someone they had dismissed as insignificant, could hold such depth, such power. They had mocked her, ridiculed her presence, and now they were watching in silence as she transformed into something they couldn't comprehend. As the last notes of the song reverberated through the music room, Martha's hands gently left the piano keys, and the room fell into a profound silence. The melody that had once filled the space with warmth now seemed to hang in the air like a memory, a poignant reminder of all that had been hidden, ignored, and overlooked. Martha sat quietly for a moment, her fingers resting lightly on the keys, her breath steadying as the last of the music faded into the silence. Her heart still beat in time with the rhythm of the song, but now, it was her heartbeat alone, silent, powerful, and full of everything she had never said aloud. She didn't look up at the door. She didn't need to. She already knew that they were all standing there, watching her, stunned into stillness by her performance. She didn't need to hear their apologies or see the expressions of shock on their faces. What mattered was that they had heard her music. They had felt her presence in a way they never had before. And that was enough. After what felt like an eternity, the silence was broken. One of the students, a tall boy with sharp features and a designer watch gleaming on his wrist, was the first to move. He cleared his throat awkwardly, stepping forward from the group. His eyes met Martha's for a brief moment, and then he dropped his gaze to the floor, as if ashamed of what he had just witnessed. "That was incredible," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. The other students shifted uneasily, exchanging glances. One by one, they began to step forward as well, their usual confidence replaced with something far more vulnerable. They weren't just seeing Martha for the first time, they were seeing themselves, too. They were realizing that the world they had built, one based on status, wealth, and privilege, wasn't as infallible as they had always believed. Miss Martha, a girl from the group said, her voice shaking slightly, I'm sorry. I never knew." Her eyes were wide, and the arrogance that had once been so evident in her demeanor was gone, replaced by genuine remorse. Martha remained seated at the piano, her expression serene but not unknowing. She had seen the subtle shift in their behavior, the way their masks had slipped, revealing the uncertainty beneath. The high schoolers who had once laughed at her now stood before her, unsure of how to proceed, unsure of how to reconcile the woman they had dismissed with the woman they had just witnessed. Mr. Landon, still standing in the hallway, was the next to speak. His voice was quieter than usual, stripped of its usual arrogance. I didn't know," he said, his words uncharacteristically soft. "I never realized. You're a remarkable musician, Martha." Martha stood up slowly, her old bones creaking with the movement, but her dignity remained firm. She didn't need their apologies or their praise. They had seen something that couldn't be erased, something that had always been within her, hidden beneath the surface of her humble janitor's uniform. She had never needed to prove herself, but now they knew. Now they understood. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice calm, but carrying the weight of years of untold stories. "But I don't need your pity, and I don't need your applause. What I need is for you to remember that we are all human. We all have our worth, whether we wear designer clothes or a faded uniform." With that, she turned away from the group and made her way to the door of the music room. She had played her song, and now, it was time to leave. The students, still standing in stunned silence, could do nothing but watch as the old woman walked out, leaving them with the echo of her music and the realization that their world had just shifted in a way they could not yet fully comprehend. Martha walked down the hallway, the mop cart once again by her side, her steps slower now but filled with a quiet strength. The world she had once been invisible in had just changed. And though no one would say it aloud, no one would forget what they had seen that day. Martha had shattered the illusion of their superiority, not with anger or bitterness, but with the raw power of her music and the quiet dignity of her spirit. And for the first time, she was no longer just the invisible janitor. She was Martha, the woman who had turned the tables, not with rage, but with grace. A new day, a changed world. The weeks that followed Martha's performance were a quiet revolution at Willow Ridge Academy. In the aftermath of her stirring piano recital, the school seemed to pulse with a different energy. It was subtle at first, like the first rays of dawn just before the sun breaks over the horizon, casting a warm glow over everything it touches. The students, those once oblivious to Martha's existence, began to notice her more. Some with guilt, others with awe, but all with a new sense of recognition. Every morning, as the students walked into the grand school gates, they would catch glimpses of Martha, hunched over her mop cart, her uniform still old and faded, but somehow more dignified than it had ever appeared before. They had always seen her, but now, they saw her differently. The glances they exchanged with her were no longer fleeting, they were longer, softer, more thoughtful. She wasn't just the janitor. She was the woman whose music had moved their hearts, whose life had spoken volumes in a single song. And although the students were learning to respect her in new ways, the changes weren't confined to them alone. Mr. Landon, the teacher who had humiliated Martha, was perhaps the most affected. His pride had always been as sharp as a blade, his arrogance the cornerstone of his career at Willow Ridge. He had never considered the impact of his words and actions on the people around him, until that fateful day when Martha played. In the weeks following, Mr. Landon found himself avoiding the usual coffee breaks with colleagues, no longer feeling the need to assert his dominance. It wasn't that he had been forced to change. No, it was more that Martha's presence had shone a light on the emptiness of his own. He had been so consumed by his belief that wealth and status equated to superiority that he had failed to see the wealth of character and strength in others. He couldn't help but feel ashamed. How could he, a man who prided himself on his intellect and achievements, have belittled someone whose heart and soul were so much richer than his own? One afternoon, after the school day had ended, Mr. Landon found himself standing at the door of the music room, the faintest traces of a melody echoing from within. He hesitated before stepping inside. His mind was still reeling from the shock of Martha's performance, and the more he thought about it, the more unsettled he became. He had never expected to be so deeply moved by someone he had treated so terribly. "Martha," he called softly, unsure of what he was even going to say. The door creaked open, and Martha's familiar face appeared in the doorway, her tired eyes glimmering with a quiet wisdom. She didn't need to ask why he had come. She could feel it, the change in him, however small. "Mr. Landon," she said, her voice calm, but the faintest hint of warmth in her tone. "What brings you here?" He stood there, fumbling with his hands, unsure of how to start. I wanted to apologize," he said finally, his voice strained. "For what I said to you that day. I didn't understand. I didn't know who you were. I was wrong." Martha studied him for a moment, and then, to his surprise, she smiled. It wasn't a smile of bitterness or triumph, but one of quiet understanding. "You didn't know," she said softly. "None of you did. But that doesn't make you bad people. It just makes you blind." Her words pierced through him. It wasn't anger or reproach in her voice. It was simply truth. And for the first time, Mr. Landon felt the weight of that truth settle on his shoulders. "You've been doing this job for so long," he said, his voice faltering. "And yet you've never asked for anything in return. I don't understand how you can just keep going." Martha looked down at her hands, worn from years of hard work, before meeting his gaze again. "Because, Mr. Landon, the work is its own reward. You don't need to be seen to know that you matter. You just have to keep doing your part. Sometimes, the most important things in life are the ones that no one notices." For the first time, Mr. Landon felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. It was humility. Not the kind that came from being humbled by others, but the kind that arose from within, from a place deep inside him that he had forgotten even existed. Martha, without even trying, had shown him that life wasn't about accolades or recognition, it was about doing the right thing, even when no one was watching. It was about having the courage to show up, day after day, no matter how small or invisible your role seemed to others. "Thank you," he said quietly, his words sincere. "I'll try to be better." And in that moment, the dynamic at Willow Ridge Academy began to shift in ways no one could have predicted. Meanwhile, the students, too, were beginning to see the world differently. The first few days after Martha's performance had been awkward. The students didn't know how to approach her, how to make amends for their previous actions. But gradually, they found their way. Some began to speak to her in the hallways, offering a polite smile or a simple, "good morning." Others stopped to chat for a moment, asking how her day was or thanking her for her work. It was still a far cry from the genuine connection that she had once yearned for, but it was a start. For the first time, Martha was not invisible. And for the first time, the students were realizing that they had more to learn from her than they had ever imagined. One afternoon, as Martha was cleaning a classroom, she overheard a group of students talking excitedly about an upcoming school talent show. As they chattered among themselves, one of them, Lauren, a popular senior who had once been one of the loudest in mocking Martha, looked over at the elderly woman. "Miss Martha," Lauren called, her voice hesitant but genuine. "Would you consider playing at the talent show?" Martha paused, her mop raised in midair, as she turned slowly to face the girl. Her heart swelled slightly. She had never expected such an invitation. But then, she remembered something her grandmother had once told her: the heart is like a garden. If you tend to it, you'll find that it grows in unexpected ways. After a long pause, Martha smiled. "I'd be honored." The news spread quickly through the school. At first, there was disbelief. Students whispered in disbelief, wondering what it would be like to see the janitor perform once again, this time in front of the entire school. But soon, the excitement grew. They couldn't wait to witness her magic again. On the day of the talent show, the gymnasium was filled with students buzzing with excitement, but there was an undercurrent of anticipation for Martha's performance. When it was finally her turn, the crowd fell silent as she made her way to the stage, the familiar mop cart replaced with a sleek black piano. She sat down at the piano and looked out over the sea of students. For a moment, she felt the same nervousness she had once felt as a young girl before a recital, but it was quickly replaced with a deep sense of peace. She wasn't performing for accolades, or even to prove anything. She was playing because it was who she was. And for the first time, the audience wasn't waiting for her to fail. They were waiting for her to show them something beautiful. The music began once again, the notes flowing effortlessly, weaving together a story of resilience, of joy, of quiet strength. The students watched, transfixed, as the woman they had once ignored became the very heart of Willow Ridge Academy. When the final note echoed through the room, there was no immediate applause. There was only stunned silence. And then, slowly, the entire school rose to its feet, a standing ovation that felt like a release, a breaking of old patterns, a shattering of the walls that had kept them from truly seeing each other. And Martha? She simply smiled, the music still singing in her heart, knowing that she had finally found her place, not as the invisible janitor, but as the woman whose music had touched the hearts of everyone who had once overlooked her. Willow Ridge Academy had changed, and so had Martha. The music they had all heard that day would echo long after the performance was over, a reminder that sometimes, the most powerful revolutions begin in the quietest of places.